Thank you so much for watching YouTube today. Oh, I'm like seriously over the top giddy excited. This, I believe, might just be one of the most important lessons for this entire series. And I say it because this is probably an area, this content is a place that most people don't really like to land, park, or even think about. But I think it's absolutely very, very critical and essential. And I call this the landmine zone. Landmines with the Holy Spirit. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, I think there are some things, if you look in the New Testament, you're going to see, we're going to talk basically briefly, four landmines. And I want my walk with the Holy Spirit to have continuity, to be full of a vibrant life, to overflow with love. Love that Romans 5 talks about that the love of God is poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. And I think this is very essential and critical for us. But there are a few things that we need to pay attention to so that we don't hit these landmines when we walk with the Spirit. The first landmine we read about in Acts chapter 7 verse 51. And this is the first martyr, Stephen. The Jews were about ready to kill him. They were stoning him for his quote-unquote heresy. And in Acts 7:51, Stephen says this. And he says it to the Jewish leaders. These are religious leaders, and they wholeheartedly believe, that they're doing the right thing, that they're honoring God, that they're protecting Orthodox belief and fighting against heresy. They think they're completely right. But Stephen confronts them and says to them in verse 51, you always resist the Holy Spirit. And family, I never want to be accused. In my past, I have resisted the Holy Spirit. And I did it sometimes even on a religious premise. And I think we have to be really careful with that. Sometimes we can get all religious, and sometimes even there's some denominational trends that kind of step away, and maybe there's not this overt hostility, but it's this subtle pullback and this subtle withdrawal, and it's a form of resistance. And family, I don't want to resist the Holy Spirit, and I want to encourage you, that's a landmine to avoid. These guys thought they were doing it all right. They thought they were being religiously upright and upstanding. And yet they found themselves, and Stephen confronted them and said, you always resist the Holy Spirit. Let's not do that. Another landmine with the Holy Spirit we read about in Ephesians 4 verse 30. And this is the landmine of grieving. Don't grieve the Holy Spirit. When you look at the context for this, grieving the Holy Spirit happens when there's dissension, when there's slander, when there's bitterness, when there's gossip. How we treat our fellow believers and the conversations we have, whether face to face or behind their back, these are things, if we're not careful, that we grieve the Holy Spirit when we're disrespectful, when we're dishonoring, when we slander, when we gossip. These things grieve. And it's a landmine that we need to be conscientious and avoid, because we can. We can completely stop slandering. We can completely stop backbiting. We can completely stop gossiping, because those are things that grieve the Holy Spirit, and it's a landmine that you can't afford and I can't afford in my life. Another landmine that we read about in 1 Thessalonians 5:19, Paul talks about don't quench the Holy Spirit. This is an interesting verb that he uses because it's the idea of water putting out a fire. And the idea of it is, the context is quenching prophecy, but you could broaden it and say the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And sometimes, Paul, in the contrast of that, Paul speaks to Timothy and says, fan into flame the gift that was put on you through the laying on of hands. And quenching says, no, we're going to pour cold water on those gifts, on that expression. And family, let's not do that. Let's fan into flame. Let's not pour the cold water on it, but let's let those gifts, and we make some mistakes and we may not get it all right, but I'd rather fan it into flame than pour the cold water and completely quench and drown that flame and that passion and that expression of those gifts. Super, super important for us. Finally, the last landmine, and this is the worst one, is in Mark 3:29. And Jesus says this, whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And blaspheming is, and I believe it's a long, steady, continuous hardening and callousing of the heart, making your heart callous. Your heart gets colder and harder and more resistant until it becomes this 100% opposition, and you're completely opposed. And that's what blaspheme is. And it's a journey. I don't think people set out, I'm going to blaspheme. No, not necessarily. It's an incremental, step-by-step decision, one decision at a time, little by little, this continual hardening, callousing, and it's resistance, it's grieving, it's quenching, and pretty soon you've walked your way all the way to the blaspheme point where there's no tenderness, no responsiveness, no sensitivity, no awareness to who the Holy Spirit is, because you've become, in essence, blasphemous, so resistant, so hard. And I just encourage you, you and I, we never want to get to that point in our walk with the Holy Spirit. So I just encourage you today, make sure you grab your copy, In Step with the Spirit. It's really, really helpful. I talk about those landmines here in one of the last chapters of the book, and really it's very, very helpful and give you some great stories. And the book's really great. Grab it on Amazon. It's really powerful and very relevant, accessible for your daily living. And what does that look like with the Holy Spirit? Just encourage you. I'd love to get your feedback. Give me some thumbs up, some comments, whatever. And of course, subscribe. That'd be awesome. And finally, our joke. Love our jokes, said very few people. This is a joke. Why was a woman in the Bible turned into a pillar of salt? Any ideas? Because she was dissatisfied with her lot. I know. All right. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next week. Have a great day.